Hello and welcome to another Giant Slayer TFT how to play video. Today our analysts will be diving into how to play Abomination for patch 11.15. Abomination, along with Draconic, was nerfed in a hotfix patch shortly after the release of the mid-set, but it's still doing well as a meta comp. We'll be covering several aspects of the build, including the strengths and weaknesses of the composition, core items and traits, and even potential mid-game transitions. With all that said, let's go ahead and get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. Starting off, let's cover the pros and cons of playing Abomination. Before we talk about the strengths of Abomination, let's discuss the nerfs to Abomination in the hotfix patch. Monstrosity lost 1 second of duration on the Enrage ability, which is certainly a nerf, but not the end of the world. The larger nerf was to the attack speed bonus gained during Enrage, which went from 200% to 100%. This is a significant nerf, but despite the nerf, the Abomination is still doing well in the meta. It's just not completely overpowered and dominating every lobby anymore. Now we get into why Abomination is strong. The main reason is just how easy it is to play early Abomination. With just Brand, Nunu, and Callista, you get 3 Abominations, meaning you get 4 total units when counting the Monstrosity. Nunu is already one of the best early frontliners, not only because he's hard to kill with Brawler, but also packs a lot of damage. Brand is not all that amazing, but being a 2 cost, you can easily 2-star him. Callista is quite strong for a 1 cost with her ability often one-shotting quite a few low-cost champions. And then on top of that, you have the Monstrosity that barrels in at the end of the fight, often cleaning up and winning the round. With those 3 base champions, you can expand upon your early board in a lot of ways. Obviously, the most common is Draconic. High rolling an early Draconic Abomination board is honestly a fast track to the top 4, even after both traits were nerfed. It's super easy to play at level 6 and coast your way to level 7 and 8. Plus, Zyra and later Heimerdinger make the perfect carry companion for an Abomination board. Now for the downsides. The major issue with Abomination is scaling, as it's more of an early and mid-game focused composition than it is a late-game one. Of course, you can always pivot out of Abomination or use an emblem to boost the strength of Monstrosity even more, but in general, an Abomination board will fall off going into Stage 5 and beyond. Another issue is you have to hit specific champions to even run Abomination effectively. There's a lot of reliance on finding Fiddlesticks during the mid-game or hitting early Draconic to play carry Zyra. Plus, the timer for the trade doing well runs out faster the longer you go without upgraded champions, so you don't really transition into Abomination. After the nerfs, it's more or less a composition you play when you have a good opening for it, otherwise you stay out of it entirely. Overall, despite the nerfs, Abomination is a strong synergy for the early stages of the game with potential to scale well if you find the right champions. Otherwise, look to use it during stages 2, 3, and parts of 4 before transitioning. Let's move on over and talk about the core items for Abomination. First off, what carry do you run when using Abomination? There's actually quite a few choices. The 2 most common are Zyra and Heimerdinger. Zyra is the catch-all carry during the mid-game that you only stick with into the late game if you can 3-star her. Heimerdinger is the best all-around late-game AP champion, so he makes for an easy transition late game. Other potential carries are Nocturne and Vel'Koz. Nocturne is a bit more niche, but you can easily fit in 4 Revenants with Nocturne later on in the game. Vel'Koz is a good replacement for Zyra if you're unable to play Draconic and lets you run a Spellweaver backline. The beauty of most of these champions is that a lot of them overlap with items. This means the best in slot for Zyra is similar to both Heimer and Vel'Koz. The number 1 item you absolutely need in that case is Shojin, either regular or radiant. The next necessary item is some type of magic damage like Archangel's Jeweled Gauntlet or Deathcap. And lastly, you can add in either another damage item or utility like Rageblade or even Static Shiv. Nocturne tends to use items like Last Whisper, Runins, and Deathblade. But again, Nocturne is a niche offshoot for Abomination, so we won't focus much on him. Instead, let's talk about the Monstrosity items. Prior to the nerf, the best in slot items for the Monstrosity revolved around damage. This meant Runin's Hurricane, Last Whisper, and even Infinity Edge were great. After the nerfs, the priority was shifted over to defensive items. Warmog's, Bramble Vest, Titan's, Sunfire Cape, and Dragon's Claw are all viable options. The nice thing about the Monstrosity is that you can give him anything and it will serve him well enough. As for item priority, try to focus on early game items to win rounds. Warmogs and Sunfire fit that description well, but so do items like Runins or Deathblade to give to Callista. Once you're into stage 3, you want to shift to picking up your main carry items, as by then you'll likely know if you're running Abomination during the mid-game or not. Radiant items are difficult to pinpoint which ones you want, but generally speaking, you want to look for Radiant versions of items you already want. Or you can just go for utility like Radiant Shroud or Zephyr, since those are always useful. With items out of the way, let's talk about core champions and traits for Abomination. The heart of any Abomination board is going to run Callista, Nunu, Brand, and Fiddlesticks. These four are the foundation from which you build on. From there, it depends a lot on what items you have and what you find. Ideally, you'll find Draconic, which lets you play Zyra carry with Set and Galio in the front line. At level 8, a typical Draconic Abomination board will be 4 Abomination champions with Zyra, Set, Galio, and another Revenant, either Ivern or Volibear. Keep in mind, Zyra is playable as a late game carry only if you can 3-star her, otherwise just replace her with Heimerdinger or Vel'Koz. Once you're into the later stages of the game, around stage 5 and beyond, you can drop Draconic for extra Revenants or splash traits like Mystic. A late game Abomination board in this case would be the 4 Abomination champions with Heimerdinger, Ivern, Volibear, and either Gwen or Teemo. It's certainly expensive, but doable if you did well during the mid game. At the end of the day, the 3 core traits you're likely to see in most games with Abomination are Abomination, Revenant, and Draconic. Secondary traits include Brawler, Spellweaver, Mystic, and Invoker. Core carries are any of Zyra, Heimerdinger, Vel'Koz, or Nocturne. It just depends on the state of the game and what items you have. Let's shift over to a brief look at each stage of the game, including potential mid-game transitions. First, let's begin with the early game. Carousel component priority generally goes towards belt, rod, or sword. This is pretty much the catch-all for most boards, so look for those if possible. We don't recommend making too many early game items, but good ones to build include Warmog, Sunfire Cape, Bramble Vest, Deathblade, and Rageblade. AP items are only worth making if you hit early AP carries like Ziggs or Brand. During Stage 2, your main goal, ideally, is to find Draconic. Hitting early Draconic is a fast track to a strong mid-game, even after the nerfs. If you can't find Draconic, that's fine. Instead, try to play Abomination units. You don't necessarily need Abomination right away, but at least look for the champions. Callista does well with Aatrox and early redeemed, Brand pairs with Ziggs at any frontline, and Nunu is, well, Nunu. Overall, the early game goal should be to play your strongest board while looking for early Abomination and Draconic champions. Try to put in Draconic as soon as you can because you want to begin farming eggs. With that, we can move into Stage 3, and the mid-game, things get a lot more interesting. During Stage 3 is when you finally put Draconic and Abomination together. Once you level to 6 on 3-2, you can roll if needed, but avoid doing so if possible. Whether you roll or not, the ideal board is going to be Callista, Nunu, Brand with Set, Zyra, and Udyr. This gives you 3 Draconic with 3 Abominations and serves as the base composition to build from. If you're unable to secure that specific board, try to play either Draconic or Abomination, but keep in mind the later the game goes, the weaker Draconic is. And if you're not finding either trait by the end of Stage 3, you may want to consider playing a different composition, as the power spike of Abomination is meant to hit during Stage 3 into Stage 4. Make sure you grab a relevant radiating item on 3-6, keeping in mind what you choose may dictate your potential transitions. Defensive or utility items are open-ended, but AP items means you want to aim for an AP carry, whether that's Zyra, Vel'Koz, Heimerdinger, or a different pivot like Karma or Teemo. Going into Stage 4, level to 7. Roll at this point of the game to upgrade your board. By this point of the game, if you haven't been running Draconic, do not force it in. Instead, replace Zyra with Vel'Koz, or, if you high roll, an early Heimerdinger. Ivern is a great level 7 champion to add in. Besides Heimerdinger, the other 5 costs to look for are Gwen and Volibear. The rest of Stage 4 is about building up your economy and hitting upgrades when possible. From here, your goal is to level to 8 sometime between 4-5 and 5-2 to begin fleshing out your endgame board. At this point, we can quickly talk about a few mid-game transitions to look for. Transitions from Abomination try to build off existing champions, most notably Fiddlesticks, but items are also a large part in what you pivot into. As mentioned, AP items generally mean you're looking to play Vel'Koz, Heimerdinger, Karma, or Teemo. Vel'Koz can be tossed in with a redeem board, Heimerdinger goes well with any late game board like Revenant, Mystic, Invoker, and Karma means Dawnbringer. If you have any AD items, you can pivot into several different carries. With a Rageblade, look to play Aphelios alongside Revenant, a second Ranger, and Cavaliers. With Deathblade and Last Whisper, you can pivot into Nocturne carry with Revenant, Assassin, or Lucian with 3 Sentinel, Cannoneer, and Revenant. What you transition into depends entirely on items, as most of them can utilize Fiddlesticks with Revenant. Keep Nunu too as well until you find a better frontline to use, while Callista and Brand should easily be replaced. Now let's move into the late game for Abomination. There's a few things to note about late game for Abomination. First, it scales poorly with just 4 Abominations. It's still fine to play, but the monstrosity won't be as effective. The main way to alleviate this issue is with an Abomination emblem, but since you can't make it yourself, you shouldn't rely on hitting it every time you play Abomination. Another way to help late game Abomination is by playing a lot of 5-cost champions. We've already established Heimerdinger as a viable late game carry, so alongside him you can add in Volibear for Revenant and Gwen for Mystic. Gwen also helps keep your backline alive with Inanimate. Teemo is also playable late game, but just beware of using too much of your health to play him. If you need, you can always drop Abomination in the late game to shift over to Revenant, Invoker, Mystic late game. Ironclad is also playable if you need the extra armor. It mostly depends on what others in the lobby are playing. Besides that, there's not much else in the late game as it mainly revolves around finding 5 costs. Last thing to talk about for Abomination is positioning. Positioning is always based around your current lobby, but Abomination does have a few quirks to keep track of. First off, there's manipulating what items go onto the monstrosity. If you have an item on every Abomination champion, the 3 closest ones to the gravestone will go on the monstrosity. So that means you can itemize Fiddlesticks if you want, just keep him further to the right of the other Abomination champions. Second, there's quite a few champions, including the monstrosity, that target the furthest away champion. If your main carry is Zyra, position her so that she aims at the enemy carry. Callista won't be relevant later on in the game, but during the early stages you want to scout and position her effectively as well. Another thing to consider is Galio and Gwen. Galio has a relatively large taunt radius, so keep him in front of your backline since he'll be able to taunt assassins. Gwen's Inanimate trait is great to have on your backline at the start, so try to position her near them. And the last positioning tip is to try to have Nunu against frontliners with small health pools. That way when Nunu casts, the ability will trigger the extra true damage and oftentimes result in one-shotting the enemy champion. That's all for today, folks. Abomination is a solid A-tier comp even after the hotfix, so don't be dissuaded by the nerfs. There's also plenty of innovating to be done for this composition as the mid-set is still being figured out. Let us know in the comments section below which composition you'd like us to cover on our next How to Play video. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.